Hello everybody, it's the 8-Fingered Man here, and today we're going to break the tradition a little bit, in that this video is a little bit religious as well as economic, the reason why that is because lately I've been hearing a lot of arguments against Christianity that involve saying things like, the Bible condones slavery, and that's just blatantly not true. The Bible does not condone slavery. That's taking it far out of context, and I'm about ready to explain why. The first reason is, the first argument that I'm going to deal with is that Noah cursed Ham and made him slaves of his brothers. And so that's evidence that the Bible condones slavery. It's not true. Noah did curse Ham. He told Ham that he would be, him and his children and his children's children would be the slaves and servants of his brothers. There's no evidence of that actually happening. In fact, Ham settled quite a ways away from his brothers, and did not, in fact, become anybody's slave, as is recorded anywhere. So that's just blatantly not true. What is true is that Noah said it. And there can be there's a lot of different arguments that can and are made for why he said it, but quite frankly, the curse itself carried no weight. Personally, I feel like if God wanted that curse to carry weight, then Ham would have been somebody's slave, and he just wasn't. And next, I'm not picking on you. That's something that's come up actually a couple of times this week. I'm not trying to, rehash an argument we've already had. But I really feel like that it seems to be something that's a common misconception. And just because some drunk, angry old man in the Bible said something does not make it, biblical doctrine. The Bible's historic, and it doesn't gloss over the crumminess of humanity. And I think that's, what makes it so unique. The patriarchs of the Bible, they were imperfect, foul human beings just like the rest of us. So that being said, Ham, didn't become anybody's slaves. He didn't become a race of slaves, further down the line. That just didn't happen. Then also there's the book of Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy that each book has at least 2 chapters dealing with proper treatment for slaves. And this is where the economics comes in. Okay, to refer to what the Hebrews had as slaves, it's too inaccurate. It's not that it's a mistranslation, it's that the context of the word has changed. We associate slavery with the African slave trade and that kind of thing, and the stuff that we did to the Indians, not the Native Americans, but the Indians, and under the British Royal Crown and all that stuff. And so it was like all that stuff, that went on in history. That's what we associate with slavery. So the word is technically accurate, but contextually it's not. In the ancient Hebrew civilization, there was very little to no money. Gold and silver was measured in shekels, and so the shekel, which was a weight, not a coin, like a lot of people think it is, it was a weight. The sanctuary shekel was a unit of weight. Dealt with an amount of gold, silver, bronze, brass, whatever you name it. But coinage was not common. Actually, a lot of archaeologists believe that the first coins were actually developed by the Babylonians some 1,000 years later. The coinage in a monetary system just didn't exist. Everything was on a barter system. You went to the market with a goat, and you came back with vegetables or a new coat or a pair of shoes or a new walking staff or a tent or whatever it is that you needed. You traded for it. and you would trade a goat for a bunch of little things, and you'd keep half of those little things for personal use, and you'd trade off the other half for other smaller things. And that was a day at the market. So that's all well and good if you have property to grow crops, property to raise cattle, the ability to have cattle, and all those things. Or if you have a trade, like a blacksmith, where you can trade services. If you don't have any of those things, you would be the equivalent of an employee at Walmart. But you would have to work for one of the wealthier individuals who owned land, who owned all these things. And that is where slavery comes in, quote unquote. And a slave was a person who worked not for money. Technically, because they're not getting paid in goods or services, they're technically slaves. But in actuality, they had freedoms, they had rights, they had value. If you assaulted a man and you injured him, then you had to give him his freedom. Like, all of his debts were paid off. He owed you nothing. So you had to treat them, decently. Their property was protected. Any money or possessions they earned above and beyond what you paid him, if you agreed to pay him anything, he got to keep. You couldn't take those. In American slavery, anything the slave owned, he didn't own. It was the master's. Everything was the master's. That just did not happen. It was unheard of in Hebrew culture, which is also unique to Jewish culture, because the surrounding cultures weren't like that. So in the sense that we understand it, slavery did not exist. It was an economic situation where they did not have anything to barter with. So they worked either until they had something that they could barter with, or until they had no need to barter for whatever reason. And sometimes, the situations were different for people getting into this situation. But it was a mutual agreement between two men who were equal in society, and the only inequality was one was the owner, and therefore he was the boss. The only time that there was forced slavery ever in the Bible was after a time of war. If you took captives, your captives were your slaves. Now, in this Hebrew culture, every 7 years you set all of your slaves free, and every 50 years was a year of Jubilee. And in that year of Jubilee, everything reset. Debt, everything, gone. No creditors could claim anything. Any time that you had left to your master on your agreement was wiped clean. So, like, if you were in debt up to your eyeballs and you sold yourself into slavery, some guy paid your debt, and in return you worked for him for 7 years. If you started that 3 years before the year of Jubilee comes, your 4 years are forgiven. All that debt's forgiven, and that was the law. You had to let your servants go, and the only time you didn't have to let a servant go was, and this is pretty much a quote, if the servant loved his master and did not want to leave him, then he was actually, they pierced his ear, gave him an earring, and he became what was known as a bond servant. And that was a man that, he loved who he worked for so much. And it was a sign of immense loyalty and trust. And those were the only lifetime servants of any kind in Hebrew culture. So the concept of slavery was totally different, a whole nother world. And it was only technically slavery in that they weren't paid with money. They got room, they got board, they got food, they got clothing. They had the opportunity to use the master's resources to gain their own wealth as well. And signs of that are all over the Bible. In fact, Jacob worked for his uncle Laban under the exact same conditions, and Jacob left Laban's house a rich man. After having worked for 14 years as the man's slave. At the end of the 7 years, Laban couldn't tell him, you have to stay. He had no say. Because it was the nature of an agreement based on a particular set of economic circumstances. It was not at all. And actually, the biblical regulations were there to keep the Hebrews from developing a slavery system the way that the Americans had it. And that was the reason for the Christian abhorrence of the American idea of slavery. And why so many people got so angered. And it was one of the big reasons for William Wilberforce opposing slavery in Parliament so vehemently, even though he had no real personal stake in it. It's because to him it was morally obscene. It was morally obscene to a lot of the earlier settlers too. When they first started bringing the slave ships to the States, actually the first slave ships were actually turned away by the Puritans. So if a belief that and racial superiority and the acceptance of slavery, it always has been a gross abuse and misquote of the Bible, and used specifically to further the intentions of rich, greedy men. It's all it was ever, all it ever was. It was never, the way we understand it, slavery was never ever condoned. Anyway, that's it. Any questions? Leave them in the comments. And I'm sorry this video took so long. You'll have a great night.